This series was produced by Don Ashford and originally aired on KTRT FM 97.5 in the Methow Valley. My thanks to Don Ashford and Diana Hotell for the privilege of making these stories available on Voices of the Methow. Enjoy!
A lot of the folks still around at that point in time were ranchers. And ranching nowadays is a little bit different. We still do have some, but not to the extent that we used to. So here's a little ranching story. Diana?
This is a story about Ross Filer. I wrote it for the Methow Valley News in April of 1977. On the door to Ross Filer's house is this handwritten message. To who this may concern, the cattle come first. I belong to the cattle ever after. Find me wherever you can, Ross. This is Ross's story, just as he told it to me. In 1900, my parents, Ben and Ida Filer, came to this valley. They had a wagon and a buggy, and my dad drove the cattle ahead of them. They just grazed them along, slowly, just grazed them along. The grass was so thick, it was all headed out like wheat. And there was water in every nook. They drove the cattle right through the streets of Wenatchee. That first year, my dad put his cattle up Poor Man Creek. All he had to do is just let them out. Oh, and you had to brand them. Everything had to be branded, the cattle, the horses, everything, because some people are honest and some aren't. Well, anyway, the thing was, cattle was the only source of income they had, and of course, you needed horses. They were just as plentiful as cars are today. Horses, all they did was work. I was born in Twisp in 1903. I was the only sheep, and I was a black one. I was born on the 13th, and that's bad. I can remember when Twisp had one store. It was a great big store, groceries on one side, hardware on the other. Oh, it had everything. It had a great big round stove in the middle. I always wanted a stove like that. Just put a big chunk of wood in and let it burn all day long. And then there were 2 blacksmith shops. They were both going all day long. They were shoeing horses all the time. I was just a little bitty tyke, but I can remember. You know, a little boy is like a tree. He's got to get roots, but it's also very easy to get hurt. And then there was a harness shop, shoe shop. They had spurs and shaps and ropes. I used to watch them unloading freight. T.G. Johnson had the transfer business. Those freight wagons had 6 or 8 horses. I liked to see a horse pull, just as steady as clockwork. I remember March in 1918. I was sitting in a bobsled. The snow was deep, oh Lord. There was a stock sale going on in town. There was a horse there, a trained cow horse. I just wanted that horse so bad. Well, my dad started to bid on him, and I thought he was going to lose it. Well, he got it, and he put me on it. Boy, oh boy, I thought I was somebody. That was when I started driving. My father was a driver also, and he taught me everything I know. A man by the name of George Grant used to come to the valley and buy up old hamburger cows, and they looked like the dickens, and we'd drive them down the valley. Men were scarce then, it was during the war, so they got me to drive. Oh, heck, I had a big time. They told me, now you watch those cows, they'll sneak off on you. They were sometimes hard to keep track of. It was 4 days round trip to Pateros. I got $10.50 to make the trip. Well, we got down to Pateros with all those cattle. There was an old bridge there. That old thing would just sway and sway when you went across. When we got them to the stockyard, we loaded them up in the cattle cars. We put hundreds of head of cattle up on the range, sometimes as many as 300 head. Beatty put up 200 head, Jim Johnson, 36, the Watsons, 45 head, and Joe Bonning, 97. We camped up there on the range all summer. We had Canyon Creek, the Middle and West Forks, and we had Lime Creek and North Creek and War Creek, and we had the Twisp River. I drove for a lot of guys, and I stacked hay. Father said I was the best man on the stack. I overheard him say that. I did just what he told me to. When he was dying of cancer, he gave me instructions. He told me to pay off the men. I did exactly what he told me. He died in 1938. I took over the place. I still had my mother. We held on to the cattle and raised hay. I did everything with horses. I never did own a tractor. I had a 4-horse spring tooth. Even now, if you gave me a field and some horses, I could do it right. But with a tractor, I'd get ridges. We kept our cattle until 1945. By then, the Forest Service made it hard on range cattle. Mother died in 1949. Well, that just about brings you up to date. Riding herd, driving those cattle, doing that was my pleasure. That was my heaven. You got hot and you got cold and you worked hard, but it was still the easiest work in the world. It's when you can't hold your own end up that it hurts like hell.
So, there you have it. Here's one of the Hottell Valley stories. Diana?
This is a story about Suzie Klinkert, a mining grandmother. It ran in the Wenatchee World in July of 1987. Gunning Big Red toward the mountain dead ahead, the 65-year-old grandmother spit gravel like bullets from the 3 fat tires. Her co-pilot's ears flapped madly against the back of his neck. Suzie Klinkert, by her own admission, has always been somewhat unorthodox. Her co-pilot, a cockapoo named Boots, could care less about that. He has a ball riding shotgun on Suzie's Honda 3-wheeler. This is Suzie's territory, at the absolute end of the Twist River Road, miles beyond the last habitation. Passing the dilapidated cabin in the ghost settlement of Gilbert, where she spent her honeymoon in 1940, she shouted above her machine's din, "I tell people, if they didn't honeymoon with a box of dynamite under their bed, they haven't lived. Actually, I've spent more than half my life sleeping over dynamite. That's the best place for it, by the way." Widowed after 45 years of marriage to her powder man and gold miner husband, Johnny Klinkert, Suzie is on the mend. "I get too much mileage out of life to just shut the door and close the curtains," she said, pulling up to her clapboard cabin beside a diverted tributary of North Creek. So many options are available for a widow. I never would have thought it possible. Suzie has a home in Twisp, 25 miles back down the road. But much of the summer season, Suzie's at the cabin near her gold mine claims. When Johnny died suddenly in 1985, Forest Service officials hoped Suzie would give up her mining claims, since they're situated in the recently formed Chelan Sawtooth Wilderness area. But Suzie, being Suzie, she defied expectations and filed assessment. "It's every miner's hope to strike it rich," Suzie said. "It was Johnny's dream, and now it's mine." She rolled freshly picked huckleberries from a towel into plastic containers for later use in muffins and pancakes. "But everyone knows," she continued, "that in mining, as in love, the romance is in the chase. It's the prospecting that counts." Since Johnny's death, Suzie has hung pretty curtains on a few of the cabin windows and covered 2 walls with her mother's religious tapestries. "I've feminized the place," she admitted. "I keep expecting Johnny to hurl thunderbolts." She laughed and wiped her eyes. "God, I miss him," she said. "But it's okay. My cup is more than half full. Don't get me wrong. He was no saint. But 40 out of the 45 years we were married were great." Just outside the windows leap the Cascades, the same mountains that hold the gold Johnny never laid his hands on. Searching for gold is still in Suzie's blood, but meanwhile she finds treasure where she can, in her children and grandchildren, the loaded huckleberry bushes, her new future. Filing assessment on her gold claims keeps Johnny's dreams alive. She may even file claims elsewhere. She's up for it. Just ask Boots.
So, there you have it. Here's one of the Hottell Valley stories. Diana?
This is a story about Terry Fitzgibbons. He was a gambler, and he lived down at the Twist Garden Apartments, and I wrote this story for the Methow Valley News in 1981. Terry Fitzgibbons was a gambling man. He dealt poker, blackjack, penguingue, and threw dice for a living since the age of 17 when he first caught the fever. At 75, a deck of cards still looks right at home in his big hands. I'm just average, he lied about his poker-playing abilities, but just like a carpenter, the longer you do it, the better you get. 5-card stud was always Terry's game, a fact that sets him apart, points him out as a purist, a straight shooter. That's the greatest game going. Too much involved in a 7-card game, that's pretty hard to figure out, but if you play it scientific, 5-card stud is best. Terry was a regular in downtown Twisp in the back rooms and basements of the taverns where poker and dice games were avidly and legally played. He'd deal until morning for Stanley Nickel in the Antlers Tavern after he got off work at the mill at 1 a.m. He also dealt for Boyd Eifert in his club cafe and got into big state pinochle games. Roving poker games in private houses were more the rule in Winthrop, although dice and cards at three-fingered jacks were not uncommon. Terry never lost his touch or his stash. The best time in the valley for gambling was during hunting season, said Terry, when the saloons filled up with men in high spirits making the annual trip to the hills for the hunt and the gaming. Terry was also a good hunter, and he liked to spend time up in the mountains, going after bear or deer, staying in cabins in the wilderness, and taking part in a friendly game after the sun went down. He plunked his winnings into fishing boats or new cars, a different one every year. He didn't save much of his take and ended up living on Social Security. At least he didn't have to support anyone else. He never married. "Nope," he said good-humoredly, "I never did." "People don't get married nowadays, do they?" he joked. "What's the use of it, anyway?" Terry ended his days down at the Twisp Garden Apartments. Not in terrific health, he read a lot, and once in a while he'd fondly pick up a nice new deck of slippery cards and deal himself out a quiet game of solitaire.
So, there you have it. The book that these stories are taken from, The Hottell Valley by Diana Hottells, can be had at the Trails End Bookstore, Ulrich's Pharmacy, the Confluence Gallery, and the Schaefer Museum. The Hottell Valley. It's interesting, isn't it?